also the weakest link, so I'm going to use my computer and read a lot. Where are we at? Oh, not there. There we go. Okay, I'm going to talk about how our brains might be interacting with space. Is this working? Oh, all right. There you go. You got it? Okay. And how we could use this idea to design better experiences. I am not a neuroscientist. When I was a teenager, I was in the right place at the right time and was asked to run the lights at a large civic auditorium. My new job required the use of this piece of equipment. This is a two-scene preset lighting controller. You'll notice there's no keyboard or mouse or monitor. It's not a computer. It's a manual device which you use by adjusting these faders on the right. Each one basically corresponds to a lighting instrument over the stage. I mentioned this device and how it works because as I learned how to use it, I was discovering something pretty exciting to a teenager. That changes in the lighting of a performance could affect the audience. You might recognize a few of those people. This is big news, especially to someone who's never been in control of anything, much less a performance in front of 1,500 people. You might imagine how this could get out of hand. Luckily, I soon met my first real-world teacher. His name was Christopher Goodyear, and he taught me, he quickly corrected my excitement and began to show me how to use my discovery to enhance performances. Remember that I had said the two-scene preset was a manual controller, so you're using your hands and you're pushing and pulling these faders to control exactly what's happening on stage right at the moment that you're doing it. Your physical movements, they're reflected live. So if you move quickly, the lights change quickly, and if you leave something out, it's not going to magically appear on its own. In this situation, timing is everything, and during a live performance, the pressure and exhilaration are intense, to say the least. With Chris's careful guidance, I came to understand the power of this controller and the light's effect on the audience. It seemed natural that I began to improvise along with the performances, like a musician might if they're sitting in with another band. One of the most important things Chris taught me was that if you think you're moving slowly, move more slowly. In other words, make the emotional effect happen, but don't show anybody that you're doing that. As I put this into practice, I began to learn to feel the effect of the changes I was making. I came to understand that I was performing right along with the actors and the dancers and the singers, but I was doing it as an emotional member of the audience. And sometimes, literally, I would sit in the audience with the controller amongst all of you, way back in the back, and I would watch the show and feel it, and that's how I would control the lights. I also noticed the effect wasn't contextual. In any number of nearly identical performances, I could heighten a given moment, or I could entirely flatten emotionally. With one hand, I could push the audience to the edge of their seats, and funny enough, with the same hand, I could pull the audience back down into tears during something as simple as an abstract dance piece, which didn't appear to have any contextual meaning. The same thing happens in straight plays and orchestras, opera, even political speeches. But the question was, why does this happen? And it wasn't until college that I realized that it might have more to do with the volume of space and the changes that occur, rather than the light. This is one of the, oh boy. This is one of the diagrams I first used to attempt to explain what I was talking about. The lines between the circle and the corner, you might, let me see, right up there. Those lines right there, to me, were kind of a representation of the way your mind might think about a flow or a movement through that space defined by the circle and the corner. I realized the effect wasn't coming from the change in the light, like I said, but from the change in the perceived volume of space that the light defined. In 1993, I was in Kansas City, and I spent my time in the cafes and parks and open-air malls watching people move. I was drawing these diagrams and watching people avoiding slamming into each other. I think we've got a few more diagrams here. There we go. Does that make sense to anyone? And I began to put together what I thought might be happening inside your brain. So I created this little chart here. This listing shows the functionality of the theory I call spatial harmonics. I call it that in honor of the 20th century choreographer and movement expert, Rudolf Laufer. In order to better describe the four major functions of this theory, we've got to talk about the brain. We carry much of the evidence of our evolution, the evolution of our neurophysiology around with us. As our brains evolved, they layered new functions on top of old ones. In the current form, there appear to be three major areas of development. Now, this was made in 1973, but we still kind of think this is the basic development. Much connected, very parallel. The oldest is the R complex. It is known as the reptilian part of the brain, and its structures typically handle core involuntary actions, nervous system, behavioral stuff. And the reason I say behavioral is because that appears to be, there are connections there that appear to be the seat of our aggression. And if you've ever seen a crocodile in the wild, you know what I'm talking about. The next layer is the limbic region, parts of which control things like our base emotions, and where information from our visual system, especially from our senses, especially our visual system, gets parsed and then passed off to other parts of the brain. A lot of connectivity in this area. The final major evolution appears to be in the form of the neocortex. This area allows us to do some of the more interesting things of life, like abstract thinking, planning, prediction, and pattern association. This is also where we begin to apply memory to understanding contextual information. And I want to talk about context, because that's not what I want to talk about. Speaking about the basic form of this theory I call spatial harmonics, I want to set aside the notion of cognition. Consciously thinking about things, contextual information, cultural learning, that's great, and it's how we communicate. This stuff is really important. It's how we make art. But I'm talking about the raw limbic brain sensations that happen way down deep underneath all that stuff, and it's what we build our context on top of. So let's look at one example of possible structures in the brain that might support what I'm talking about. This comes from a book by Dr. Ramachandran, who you might have seen in TED. He's very popular. We see that the visual system passes information along to parts of the limbic brain down here. Let's see, this is a part of the limbic brain on its way to the visual cortex. Now, something really cool, well, it's not cool for the people who have this problem, but one thing that's been discovered, sorry, is called blind sight. When the visual pathway has been cut off, and these people are blinded by this, we still have other connections. We're still passing information on from the eyes. And in blind sight, subjects with a break in their visual pathway, which causes them to be partially blind, can nonetheless point to a shape in the affected area of their vision and describe some quality about it. Their descriptions are typically of a felt sense about the shape, whether it's soft or sharp or that kind of stuff. In other words, it's probable that what you see gets passed on to older parts of your brain and allows you to develop a feeling about it before you even recognize what the thing is. And this is happening in us all the time. Another idea from research is that our brains contain something called mirror neurons. These connections are triggered in the same way whether you're watching someone perform an action or you're doing the action yourself. And they're scattered throughout the brain, so they affect all different kinds of areas. It has been suggested that our empathetic reactions also are affected by this, and you can kind of test this out. If you look at someone who's really crying, notice your own expression changes, regardless of the context. Okay, there are dozens of other examples, but I'd like to get to the theory itself and kind of describe those 4 bullet points. The first thing that your brain does is it maps space 3-dimensionally. I think this has something to do with our fight or flight mechanisms, and that's just a quick, basic kind of first thing. As soon as you witness a space, bam, you can kind of tell where the basic blocks of the space are. And you're starting to develop your felt sense at this point. The second thing your brain does, and I'm not saying that it does these things in this order. It's so highly parallel, it's hard for anybody to say one thing happens before another. But the next thing your brain does is it generalizes all the details of this space in order to build a more complete picture of the possibilities of motion that the space presents. Do the walls appear to be made of rock, or are they made of paper? Are they smooth, or are they covered in sharp protrusions? This kind of stuff helps you begin to understand how movement through the space might occur. Which leads directly to the next action. Your brain assumes the most comfortable motion in a given volume of space. This is the most elusive concept to describe, but it's also the most important. So I need a volunteer. Who is the person who is going to assist me? Or I could just take a volunteer. Here we go. All right, cool. Steve? Awesome. Okay. Steve is now going to demonstrate any kind of motion. He's just going to be a prop. Okay. You're going to stand here, and if you'll just look out in the audience and then close your eyes. Cool. All right. So I did that because I don't want you to get any contextual information. Try not to smile, because that's contextual information. I might have to turn you around.
Wrong volunteer.
All right. Yeah. We'll see. Okay. So what Steve does when he enters this volume of space is he changes it. You probably noticed that. He starts, his presence defines this area that I'm standing next to. All right, so let me get back to this. As I've said, your brain assumes the most comfortable motion in a given space. It's not going to subconsciously move you in a way that wouldn't be comfortable to you. And it's not going to subconsciously imagine anything moving in space that's not going to be comfortable. Now, I'm going to get this ball over here. I have props. We also have props. And then we got the props. All right. Okay. I'm going to move this ball merely in a way that suggests how your brain might be thinking about the volume of space. Obviously, this is as close to this kind of demonstration as I can get. So I'm just going to move this. And maybe those are comfortable motions to you if you just pay attention to the ball and not me. Or maybe they're not. I don't know. So I'm trying to define, you see this ball in this space here. Does that make sense? We'll see. All right. This could be the volume of space defined by a desk or a chair in your office. It could be your car out in the middle of the night under a light in a parking lot. You know, all these objects around us define the space, but the movement of this ball was what I was trying to get at. And the effect is scalable. So I'm going to have you lift your arm up, and then 90 degrees if you can with that. Just hold that. So if you observe a smaller space, if something defines a smaller space for you, then your brain's going to do the same thing. You see, this is a little bit different for you because now we have these little nooks and crannies we can go into. But your brain's still doing this 3D thing. All right. Let me go back to the big ball. And this leads me to the final step in the process as far as it concerns what we need to know as designers. Now, your brain set up this felt sense, right? What it thinks could happen. And once it's mapped this space and generalized the details, and it's internalized this ideal movement, you have a good idea of what to expect. Now, your felt sense is going to range between comfortable and uncomfortable in this given space at this point. Though your brain is assuming comfortable motion, that assumption is kind of sitting to the side. Now your brain is ready to do what? It's ready to observe actual motion. Now this actual motion, I'm going to go back into here. It's a little bit different than using the small ball. But this actual motion is either going to confirm your brain's assumption about what's comfortable, or it's not. Let's try this one. Is that comfortable to any of you? it doesn't look comfortable to see. But what I'm trying to do is get to a point where you understand that these movements that you're actually observing in this space now don't match what the space is telling you would be comfortable. Does that make sense? You can put your hand. Okay, thank you. Oh, and thank you. So let's do this. Okay, which brings me to the basic idea of spatial harmonics, which is easy enough. Changes in space affect your comfort level. How easy can that? I mean, that's just as basic as it can get. Hopefully, you'll be able to use this in your work. So, what do we do with this? Who might use this information, and how might they go about using it? The answer is anyone who has anything to do with creating a physical reality or its virtual equivalent. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Which human beings have to interact with. In the theater, directors, designers, and actors obviously can use this information to move through space in a better way, a way that better supports the contextual information they're trying to get across. In dance, the same thing happens, and maybe we can start to do a better job of affecting the audience because of our motion through space, as we saw earlier. They did a great job, I think. Rather than just creating movements that feel good to them, and they kind of think that they're doing something for us, and maybe it isn't because of the stage itself. In architecture, architects, space planners, and decorators use this information to create spaces that take into account how we feel as we move through them and how we use them in our daily lives. So if your workspace is set up wrong and it feels wrong, it is wrong, pretty much. Now these last three areas are interesting because they don't exist in 3 dimensions, right? You may say, right, but that's your neocortex talking. Parts of your brain are constantly attempting to deal with sensory input in these terms. Now I've got to rush. So let's skip ahead. Rudolf Arndt. Let's go into the 2D experience. That's what we're going to talk about. Rudolf Arnheim taught us about the various pieces of 2D design and how they seem to interact using these terms. But these terms never seem to really have any definable meaning. When you try to define weight or line, for instance, you come up with a vague idea of what it might be, but no satisfactory conclusion. I believe that parts of the brain are attempting to see things in 3 dimensions, and that this theory I've described to you still applies in 2D. This might help define those terms that we looked at to describe what works and what doesn't. For example, here I've placed some basic shapes on a field. By a show of hands, how many of you find this to be a comfortable arrangement? No one. Okay. Is this better? Yeah. Okay. What about that? Is that better? Even better, right? Now, if you think about how some part of the brain might be assessing this arrangement in 3 dimensions, you might begin to see my point. I'm going to end with an exercise you can try anywhere, which might help you think about your body's relationship to the space you move in. You're going to hold out your dominant hand, like this in front of you. Yeah, you can do it now, but it's really going to work great when you stand up and start walking around and moving through space. Right. Now, you just hold it up and move around in your normal space. And you may notice that that you change your orientation as you approach things. Like I'm feeling this space right here, but when I stick my hand out and I come up to the computer, I kind of feel like I need to do that to get right next to it. And you should try to witness, which is what I'm doing, how your experience with the outstretched hand is expressed. I'm feeling, I have this felt sense. I don't have an emotion, I'm not mad about it or happy. I'm just trying to do what I need to do to physically do this. And your hand really out in this position I found makes you aware of this volume of space right here. Okay, here's some questions you can ask yourself. Is the movement comfortable? Do you have to go out of your way to make it a comfortable experience? Do you feel a mental pressure or urging to move in a certain way? And I think you might feel that. And I think you've already witnessed some of that happening in yourself watching some of the things that have gone on stage right now. So thank you very much.